I'm Claudia Dean with the AAPOR Heritage Committee, and with me today in the Kaiser Family Foundation studios in Washington, D.C. is John Russonello, the subject of today's Heritage interview. John is currently a partner in the Washington-based polling firm Belden Russonello, which he runs with his wife Nancy Belden, and where he's worked for coming up on 25 years. He came to the polling world from political consulting and has worked as a press secretary and speechwriter on Capitol Hill. And he's been an active member in AAPOR for many a year now. John, welcome. Thank you so very much for being here. You were going to start by telling me how you managed to save yourself from the horrible, racking world of politics into the calm waters of polling.
Well, I got started. Actually, you could blame Henry Kissinger for this.
For many things.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. As a college newspaper editor, the first thing I did was send all the freshmen a questionnaire on who they thought was the most respected, who they respected most in America. And to my horror, I got back that the most respected person in America to the college freshman at a liberal arts college in the Northeast in 1974 was Henry Kissinger. So that made me think there's something about public opinion that I want to look at more closely. At the time, I was interested in journalism, and I was writing news stories for newspapers across New Jersey while I was going to school. But that one piece of horrible data got me interested in public opinion. And then when I graduated, I went into campaign work. And one day I was working on a campaign in Florida, and David Sawyer, the longtime media maker out of New York, had his Israeli psychologist named Ned Kennan do all the focus groups. And one day Ned got caught in a rainstorm in LaGuardia and couldn't get there. And so they turned to me, the speechwriter and message person on the campaign, and said, "You're the moderator." So I became a focus group moderator that day, and I've never looked back.
It was weather related.
It was weather related.
Right. Had you been exposed to polling in your campaign roles?
Yes. Yeah.
And what
we analyzed,
were you guys using it from afar, or you were?
We in polls, in campaigns, you obviously use, if you have enough money, you use public opinion polls and focus groups to find out what people are thinking and how to sell your message and whether or not your candidate has a chance. I delivered one poll to a candidate in Jersey City once who was running for mayor, and he said, "I feel like you're the doctor telling me I have an incurable cancer," because everyone else was telling him he was going to win, and I told him he was going to lose by 20 points because that's really what the numbers said rather than the consultants. So it's an interesting dynamic that goes on in campaigns where the pollster oftentimes has to tell the candidate the bad news.
And you, to some extent, also married into polling. Do you want to talk a little bit about your father-in-law? Or that was after you had already sort of dabbled in focus groups and begun that you met Nancy? And
that's true. During my campaign work, I became somebody who could do focus groups as well as analyze them. But then I met Nancy Belden, and we were married, and I got to know her father, Joe Belden, who was one of the pioneers of polling, a really great guy, because he was very generous with his time and with his advice. And the one thing I admired about Joe was his best quality was the fact that he was fearless. He wasn't afraid of what he didn't know. So if he had a problem or he approached it and he wasn't sure, it wouldn't make him stop. It would make him try to find out how to do it. And consequently, he became the first person in America to do a statewide poll, the Texas poll. He was the first person to do a national marketing TV rating system for Mexico, in TV and radio rating system. He was the first person to do widespread newspaper marketing to tell editors what the readers wanted to see in the United States. So Joe had a lot of firsts, and he was very generous with his time.
And did you had to consult him on various occasions when you were starting out?
Once in a while we consulted Joe, yeah, and he was happy to give us his advice. But Nancy grew up in his business, really, in Dallas, Texas. She was steeped in the methodology of polling, so I learned from her.
And tell me, your end of the business has been, you said you started with focus groups, you pitched in that first time. Do you remember how that first focus group went? Was it fun? Did you like it, or?
Yeah, I took to it right away. It was a lot of fun because it was, public opinion research is just like communicating. If you do it right, it's not about you, the researcher. It's about your subject, the people that you're interviewing, and that's why focus groups are so important. Even if you're doing a poll, I found that you need to find out what's on people's minds first in order to ask them the right questions to find out what they think about your issues, because it's not just what you care about, it's what they care about. And you really get a good sense of that from doing focus groups.
You were giving me an interesting example the other day about some of the work you had done on focus groups around the death penalty. It seemed sort of like a classic example of this part of the business where you're helping people understand, where the public is coming from even before they can measure it more scientifically. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
That was an interesting campaign issue that we did. Back in 1998, we were asked by the ACLU to look at public attitudes towards the death penalty. And it's a perfect example of where focus groups work, because you need to dig at what people's values are. So we asked people about their opinion on the death penalty, and we found that nobody was saying that they wanted the death penalty. They said, we need the death penalty. I said, what do you mean by that? And for some people it was retribution. For some people it was, they felt it was a deterrent, and other people felt they didn't really want it, but they felt society needed it because there was so much lack of order and finality to the justice system that they couldn't see not having it. So we quantified that in the poll and found that retribution and deterrence were small parts of the public, and the majority of the public wanted the death penalty for the sense of order that it brought. And that was good news for the people who wanted to do away with it, because if it was just retribution, you're never going to change those attitudes. Those are hardcore. But you can change the people who felt that they needed a sense of order over time, perhaps, by showing that the system needed to be fairer. And that's when we recommended to people that after our research, to the groups working on this issue, that they start working on moratoriums to show that the disparity in the administration of the death penalty was the way to go. And since then, we've had several states overturn the death penalty. And it's, as we said to them at the time, it's not going to happen overnight, but if you keep at the message that says there's a disparity in the administration and unfairness in the way it's administered, then it will take you where you want to go. Another really good example of this is in 1990, we did some of the first research for the tobacco plaintiffs' bar. And it was before all the big cases were brought. It was sometime between 1990 and 92. And we went around the country doing focus groups to try and understand if this went to trial against the tobacco companies, about people who got sick, and some of them had relatives die because of cigarette smoking. How could we get people who would be on juries sympathetic to the victims? And we found the fascinating thing, which ran contrary to what the lawyers thought we were going to find. It was that people didn't really have sympathy for the victims. A responsibility in America, the value of responsibility in America is so strong that people said, everybody has to take responsibility for themselves. This is kind of wacky to me, because it's such a strong sense of responsibility. What they said was, what motivating us is the fact that the tobacco companies knew that they were selling something that was injurious, and they did it anyway. This switching from the fairness value and sympathetic value to compassion was the down value, and the up value was responsibility. And they felt that that if you focused on the companies and the bad behavior of the companies rather than the victims, you're on better ground. And that's essentially where people went with those cases. It was very interesting.
It sounds like one of the themes, too, is that you often have to tell people who are sponsoring your research things that they may not want to hear. Is that part difficult? You were saying even it was true, with the candidate and
Yeah.
with the death penalty folks.
The
And
death penalty folks was a very interesting case on that, because I went down to some place off of the coast of Georgia. There was some retreat they had, and they had about 100 of the people who'd been working on death penalty issues for their whole careers. And I said to myself, how can I go out and tell these people that what they're doing it's just hasn't been working, and it's not going to work if they continue on this path, because they devoted their lives to this. So it's hard.
Right.
So you have to respect their life's work and their point of view and say, here's another way.
And you do that by, you guys had done polling on top of your focus group.
Yeah.
So you sort of get the insight from the focus group. And then do you find that, have you ever been misled by the focus groups? Then when you do the polling, you find out, well, that's not what most people think. I must have gotten kind of a wacky bunch of people in the room that day, or?
Sometimes if you do just one or two groups, we never do one group, we do maybe 2 or 4 groups. But if you do enough of them, you do 6 or 8 groups, and you wait and listen carefully to hear what people are saying over and over again, you pretty much get a good range of things. But the polling definitely is needed to make it precise and to give your best advice. Some of the most interesting things about focus groups is, the most difficult thing is keeping a straight face sometimes.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's the tobacco focus groups come to mind. I was in San Diego doing a group with young men between the ages of 21 and 30 who were sometimes smokers. And I started around the room and I pointed to one person and I said, tell me about when you smoke. And he said, well, I don't smoke that often. I usually just smoke after I'm doing crack. And 7 people around the table said, yeah, that's right, me too. They all said in agreement. So you can imagine my difficulty in keeping a straight face as we went around the room. People will tell you amazing things in focus groups.
Is it hard when if you're trying to press a case that you don't, not necessarily agree with, but you can't even see into that mindset? Sometimes I imagine you're generally, doing this for causes with which you have some agreement, but of course you have to probe all sides of the issue, including,
like the death penalty
mythologies, and yeah.
People said, if I felt somebody was responsible for, a relative was responsible for a murder, I would say, we need that finality. It was hard for me to believe people could be so harsh to relatives, but so that's oftentimes you hear people say things in focus groups that you think are really extreme, but you have to keep going and keep digging and finding out where it comes from. The environment's a good example. We do a lot of work on the environment for a number of environmental clients, and we were doing a poll on biodiversity. We did a lot of focus groups and polling on biodiversity over the last 10, 15 years on that term and the concept. And one thing we try and do is find out the core values that are motivating people. That's what focus groups do a little bit better than polling. And then you test the values in the polling. And so you ask people, why do you care about the environment? And you get different answers if you dig deeply. They can care about the environment because some people say because God made the environment and I respect God's work. Some people say because I need it we should protect the environment for the health of my family. Other people say we need it because I believe all the critters are sacred and we should not mess with everything, the animal life. Others think you should protect the environment for stewardship of the planet. And when you ask each of those after each of those things the question, why do you care about that? Why do you care about protecting what God created? Why do you care about protecting animals that you think are sacred? Why do you care about your family? Why do you care about stewardship of the planet? People look at you and say, why are you asking me that question? I can't answer that question. When you've reached the point where people can't answer the question anymore, when they look at you funny and say,
isn't that obvious?
Isn't that obvious?
Right.
You've hit a core value. So what we do is we take those core values that we find in focus groups, and then we test them in a polling. And we had to tell our clients that the core value that everybody in the room represented, well, the environmental activists, was the critters are sacred. I said, those are 10%. So I had to tell my client that they're part of the 10%ers. And it's not always a happy thing for them to hear, but it's very valuable for them to learn that that slice of the values segment of America on environmental issues is small, and these other values play much more heavily on people.
Have you talked about this sort of work at AAPOR over the years, or tell me how has AAPOR received a more qualitative issue researcher, or what's your relationship with the organization been?
Well, AAPOR has been a really great organization for me because I've learned so much just by being a part of the AAPOR family that is, as the book says, a meeting place. It's a place where you can just wander up to people who know more than you, which is most people there, in my case, and they will help you. I remember Warren Matofsky helping me out on a question that I had I was working on
famous CBS pollster and exit pollster. Yeah,
an economics question on the economy. He helped me with the question wording. I remember listening to Gary Langer one year talk about a different way to look at political independence. I think the best thing about AAPOR is learning just by listening and talking to people, and the back and forth that you get and sharing your experiences with them. In terms of focus groups, AAPOR has been gradually warming up to focus group research, and I think it's getting there. It had lagged behind for many years, but AAPOR has a lot of people in it who are very expert in statistics and other things that we need in polling, and so.
You were telling me you had to go. You and a colleague were presenting focus group results to Census Bureau statisticians, and that was like a bad dream.
It was funny. It was Vince Brailio, who's a Republican pollster, and myself were asked to, our firm and his firm were asked to conduct some focus groups before the 1990 census to find out about people's motivations for filling out the census, why some people did, why some people didn't, and to also give them some help on the questionnaire. We were going to present to the top statisticians in the Census Bureau compound in suburban Maryland, it's outside of Washington, D.C. And Vince stands up, and he had to give the first presentation. I was going after him, and he said, I had a dream last night that I was standing before 12 learned statisticians from the Census Bureau, and I was naked, and I had to report focus group data. And he said it was not comfortable, and it broke up the room, and it was a good...
Close enough, 2 out of 3.
Yeah. But he was right. They were rightfully skeptical about focus groups because oftentimes focus groups are used in the wrong way. If you tell people, if you try and put numbers on a focus group, that's obviously wrong. But if you use them in the right way to talk about how people are thinking and feeling about something, it can be very useful.
And the profession, I mean, that part of the profession has stayed fairly stable, the sort of more qualitative end, even as the rest of the profession has been changing a lot. The methodologies have changed a lot over your career. What other changes in the profession have you seen over your career?
Well, it's interesting. The focus group profession has changed in that it's gotten a lot more skillful. It's gotten a lot more savvy. When I first started doing focus groups, there was maybe one focus group facility in each small city, and it was run by little old ladies with blue hair that had shoeboxes with file cards. And you said, I want women under 35, 18 to 35 who are political independents. And they'd look in the shoeboxes and they would come out, flip their cards and start calling them. Now, there are no more blue hairs. It's young people.
Well, the rinses have gotten better, I'm
yeah,
sure.
young people with computers,
Right.
and there are a half a dozen or more in each city. So it's gotten a lot more skilled in a way, and you can do a lot more things in the focus groups and target more people, and collect data more quickly than you did in the past. In terms of polling, you know that polling's changed a great deal because of the technology. But the interesting thing about polling, to my mind, is right from the very beginning, people debate sampling, and they're still debating sampling, whether it's cell phone or a landline or a computer or whatever the next thing is going to be. But with all the debate over sampling, in my opinion, still the most important factor in error in polling is the same as it's always been. It's probably not sampling, in my view. It's questionnaire design. Questionnaire design is still the most important thing. It's the thing that will most likely give you bad results in a poll, and that hasn't changed. You still have to look at how good the questions are.
And a lot of that comes out of the work you do.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with listening carefully in focus groups, checking yourself closely for bias in questions, and making sure that you really hear all sides, and that your questionnaire represents that. But it's interesting as the debate over sampling changes and gets heated up over the years. You shouldn't lose sight of the fact that questionnaire design is still the key thing, and that when you look at a poll, say this is a crummy poll, or this is a good poll.
It's always right in front of your face, but sometimes we look past it to the more complicated stuff.
That's true.
Yeah. You promised me a wacky story before we run out of time.
Well, I was in Ann Arbor, Michigan, reporting on an environmental poll that we conducted 1,000 sample across the nation. It was a national random digit dial poll.
Whole country.
Whole country. And I'm starting my presentation. I'm in maybe the second slide, and the client is up there with me, who paid for it, and environmental group, and it's a group of about 100 environmentalists. And one person, a large man from the back, raises his hand after my third or fourth slide and says, "I took that poll. You called me." And I said, "Well, you may think you did, but that's very nice." And he said, "No, I did." And
there's hundreds of millions of people in this country.
Yeah, I said,
there's only 100 people in this room.
The chance is not possible. And he recited almost every question in the poll. And I was dumbstruck.
What are the chances?
I was so dumbstruck that I asked him a dumb question. I said, how was the interviewing? Which was obviously the wrong question to ask, because chances are you never know what you're going to get back. And he fortunately said it was perfect. They were terrific. So, and then I walked away from that day thinking, what are the chances, what are the odds of this ever happening again?
That is a fluke.
It's a fluke.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Did I miss any major stuff you wanted to talk about today?
No, I think this was great. Thank you, Claudia.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Okay, thanks.